Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Real Estate and Murder.
Part 2 of Case 2.
Right. Case number 2, which we're enjoying. I'll say enjoying with like a grain of salt, right? Like
Yeah.
we loved deep diving into this case for you guys. So yeah, everyone, welcome back after that breather. We needed a second to take a breath and go in and tell each part of this story in the way that it needs to be told. So we're back. And in part 1, we talked about Todd Kohlhepp's childhood and his first criminal offense. And so if you haven't listened to that, you're definitely want to go back and listen to it all the way through. And in part 2, we're going to kind of take this a little bit further into the next steps of his life. So we left off where Todd was sentenced to a 15-year prison sentence in an adult prison.
Yes.
At 15 years old.
As a 15-year-old.
So Amy, will you just touch briefly about his education and his experience in prison, and then what he does as soon as he's released?
Sure. So Todd, up until his 20s, he's kind of a mess in prison, acting out,
getting in trouble.
Not the model prisoner that we often hear about. And then when he is in his 20s, he kind of turns that around, becomes a model prisoner, and uses his time in prison to earn a bachelor's in computer science. And so as soon as he's released, he's been serving in Arizona. He moves to South Carolina to live with his mom.
Home. Yeah. So he's out of prison. He's trying to start fresh and go back to South Carolina, maybe where he's not known or his name isn't known around. I believe his dad says somewhere he didn't particularly care to keep him around, to try and keep him.
I mean,
there.
This is like 2001, 2002,
right,
when he's released.
So Todd goes back to South Carolina, and he does take a job as a graphic designer, which was, it sounded like for a short period of time, like a year or so, because of his degree. And meanwhile, Todd decides to get himself a hobby.
He does.
And this hobby that he selects is riding motorcycles. Now, keep in mind, he went into prison when he was 15 years old. He's been in there, and they don't have motorcycles in prison. I've looked. I've checked. And they don't.
Looked.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to plan
around.
ahead. Yeah. They don't allow that. And so, in his early 30s, he's coming out, and he's like, well, I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to get myself a motorcycle. So he takes himself over to a motorcycle dealership in Chesney, South Carolina, kind of close to home.
I'm going to stop you right there, though, Sarah, because I don't know how many of our audience knows this, but Sarah is actually a big motorcycle biker
enthusiast. We'll call it.
Bad A.
Thank you. Wow, that's a compliment. Thank you. Yeah, riding motorcycles is a passion of mine. It's a hobby. I have had it for a lot longer than Todd did. I'll say that much. My fiance and I both ride motorcycles and love to spend our time enjoying that freedom. So I get the attraction to that. We see it quite often kind of in the biking community, the motorcycle community, where
a newbie
jumps in and they show up with a brand new bike and all the brand new leather with all the brand new logos on it.
So they kind of stick out, maybe like
a
sore thumb.
Yeah, they stick out for sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you should explore every hobby that you want to and that you enjoy. However, it's not the easiest thing to just jump into. Not for everybody, especially with zero experience. I mean, let's think about it. Todd went in when he was 15 years old. He probably doesn't even know how to drive a car.
Well, he would have had to at least get a motorcycle's license, right? Like in Utah, you have to get your special.
That's a great question. You should be licensed with what is called so funny that you're bringing this up.
I know.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's called a motorcycle endorsement, or an ME. You go take a test at the DMV and you have to prove on paper and in execution that you can ride a motorcycle. However, not everybody goes and does that, especially before buying a motorcycle, because you don't actually have to have that certification before purchasing
one.
Nope, you don't.
So the motorcycle shop isn't going to ask you for proof of.
Nope. The only thing that I have found is that when you go to insure your motorcycle, if you do have your endorsement, sometimes you'll get a discount.
Okay.
But there's no requirement. And even if you've purchased a motorcycle and you're driving it home and say you're pulled over, if you state, I just purchased this motorcycle, here's proof, like, you have to be able to transport the bike, right? And so you don't have to be endorsed already to purchase it and even to ride it. And I'm just going to go ahead and say I know that for a reason. I've been riding my motorcycle, which I'll just say it's Harley Davidson. That's my favorite. That's my brand. That's my fan.
Maybe Harley Davidson sponsor.
Maybe we will. Oh yes, please, Harley, come for me. I ride a 2013 Electric Glide, which is a pretty big bike. It's one of those big cruising bikes you see out there. I love riding my bike. I'm what I feel like is a good rider. I've been fortunate enough not to have any major accidents or made any major errors. That's by intention. I find myself to be a very defensive driver on my bike, which you should be.
Yeah.
And I'm even more of a defensive driver on my motorcycle than I am in my truck.
Yeah.
So,
well, you have to be aware of everything because there's nothing protecting you.
You do. I take it very seriously. But let's just say, I mean, some people consider an endorsement optional. But anyway, I digress. Todd decides to pick up this hobby, which, again, we see. And that's,
he could be freeing. He's stuck in like a cell and now he's out and the wind in his hair.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
You nailed it. The wind in his hair. It's a very lucrative like hobby or something that people sort of envy, this lifestyle. You can just jump on a bike and go and you're so in control. And like you said, Batty, all of those bikers, right? And this, I'm not speaking from my personal belief necessarily. I'm saying that that's the perception oftentimes. And so people want to jump into that community and see what it's like.
Something new, something different.
It is. So
cool kids.
Well, the wannabe cool kid. Yeah, I don't know. Todd decides that he's going to purchase himself a GSXR 750, which is like a sports bike.
A Suzuki,
right? Yep, that's right. And I'm not as familiar with that category of bike because, again, I ride a very large, what we call like a cruiser.
Okay.
So this is like a sports bike that you see going down the highway, like phew, phew, just like rides right by you, flies by you. And Todd purchases this motorcycle from Superbike Motorsports, which, like I said, is in Chesney, South Carolina. And he's really struggling to learn to ride it. He tries to ride it. He asks the staff there to help him ride it. And they're in the parking lot with him, in the back of the shop with him, trying to help him. And he just can't. He's tipping it over or it tips on him. I'm not clear exactly because the story was a little bit vague.
Does that just mean like the bike like lays down in the dirt?
Or and I see this a lot with like new riders, they're shaky and they're uncertain. And so they're not focusing on balancing their weight. They're more focused on, I have to go straight ahead, which as you learn to ride and you become an experienced rider, that is so natural that you don't even think about it anymore. Like when I'm moving my motorcycle forward, the first thing I do is get my feet up. However, people that are brand new to learning.
Yeah. Is there like a balancing ratio kind of?
Yeah. I mean, there is, but you have to trust that the motorcycle knows how to do that. And it does. The motorcycle balances. You operate the motorcycle. That's what I always tell everyone. I do get a lot of women that ask, I'd love to ride. I've always wanted to ride, but I'm scared. If you get on a motorcycle to learn to ride it and you're scared, I promise you, first, you will not enjoy it. And second of all, you or the bike or both can get hurt. So, and I'm not criticizing Todd specifically because I'm saying that's a common thing that I see.
Well, but as women, I feel like we're more likely to ask for help.
Absolutely.
I mean, knowing what we know about Todd kind of has an ego.
He has a huge ego.
So him not being able to be great at something right out of the gate in a group setting with people that have probably ridden their whole life.
Yep.
It was probably deflating on his ego.
Right. Which we know as someone with his blend of personality, right? His recipe. It really angers him. It embarrasses him. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, this will come up later, so I'll just mention it now. One of the things that Reggie goes to defend him about is that he was embarrassed. He was so embarrassed. How dare people embarrass him? And what I'm referring to is Todd's story later on in life is that these guys were
the victim. Todd is the victim in Todd's mind.
Yeah, Todd is
He's not the.
He's the leading actor, actress, director, producer, the executive director, the composer of his own movie. Like, he is absolutely the focus of his own story. But he does say that the guys at the shop don't really want to help him or they kind of poke fun and tease. I don't know that is or isn't true.
There was never any evidence from friends or people that knew the people at the bike shop
that they were actually rude to him.
Those kind of people. I mean, they have a successful bike shop. Like, you don't have repeat customers by being rude and making fun of those that are coming in to buy from you. But
that's what I was just going to say. And I can see within the motorcycle community, when you've got someone who's, again, like brand new jumping into this and clearly is not prepared or not ready. And, he went in and picked like a sport bike, like a big deal. I mean, it's like jumping from not even getting a learner's permit to driving like a Hummer. I mean, he just went, he went for the big one. I don't necessarily mean big in size, but he went for what looked cool without any skill to ride it. And so I can see like a little bit of like razzing or, a little bit of teasing, like, are you sure you want to start with that? Maybe we should get you on a, I could see that a little bit without there being any intention to be directly hurtful, because like you said, they have a very successful motorcycle shop and they're not out there picking on their customers or being mean to them. In proof, they have a very successful clientele, like rotating clientele that keeps coming back to them.
I will say, when you just said that, describing them in that way, them as in the motorcycle shop,
the employees,
it reminds me of like men in general. When they're with their friends, they say some mean things.
They can
as boys to each other. That's how they bond. And so with Todd not being able to make friends, Todd struggling to be a good friend, not knowing how to associate with children his own age, he probably didn't recognize that was actually them trying to bond with him, if they did say anything.
That's such a good insight, Amy. That it really is a brilliant insight. And we'll get into why this is so important, but it really is. So that was a really, really great thought. Like, he has an inability to have relationships and friendships with other people. And so whatever he sees as offensive, or he's not fitting in, or this isn't easy for him, but it is for everyone else, he has the potential to lash out against, right? That was a really great insight. So he takes the motorcycle home. He actually even has to ask the guys at the shop to help him get it home.
Yeah, he doesn't actually drive it home. He has them drive it to his property.
Again, I could see a little bit of poking, like, oh, you can't even get it home? Okay.
Well, or are you sure? Are you sure you want us to drive it? Like, you don't want to try?
But they do. They take him home. They get the bike there. And Todd, coincidentally, reports this bike stolen 13 days later, which I'm saying coincidentally because whether that really happened or not, I can't say for sure. I obviously was not there. However, I find it incredibly convenient that a brand new, expensive motorcycle.
He said he got the money from his grandfather to pay for the bike.
Yeah, which they don't give us any more information on that.
No.
But, and that brings up an interesting point. Like, he's just out of prison and his grandfather's gifting him or rewarding him with a brand new motorcycle. Like, it seems like he has no adult in his life that like shuts it down.
Yeah.
But that's, I digress. I just find it fascinating that for someone with this mindset, who's willing to, screw everyone else before himself, magically reports this bike stolen. He does lose a $1,000 deductible from his insurance. And he brings that up later as like a point of defense,
that he wasn't the one.
I find it ridiculous. I think he did something to the bike, but I don't know. I can't say. So he decides a little later on, months down the road, that he wants to try again. So he's going to go back to the shop and he's going to...
a bigger bike, maybe like the ones that you described.
He goes smaller.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he does. Which I'm just going to say, and if you're in the motorcycle community, this shouldn't be offensive. I don't mean to offend anyone, but the size of the motor often correlates to the skill set needed to ride it, right? Not always, but it does. Sure. And so a lot of new riders will start with really small engines, as low as, I should say motors, as low as like 250, and 750 is kind of that mid-break where then you're getting into larger motors. And so he actually decides to go smaller. He picks himself out in his head and goes and takes a look at a black Kawasaki Katana 600. So we're going a little smaller. Very similar, like it's a sport bike as well, of course. And then the mechanic takes it back to start working on it for him. So he's going to keep trying at this hobby, you know, right? So we're going to fast forward a little bit from where we were at, talking about his first purchase and trying to figure it out. And we're going to take you down the road to November 6th in 2003. And we're going to actually tell you about a mass murder at the motorcycle shop in Chesney, like I said, Superbike Motorsports. This has been coined ever since then, known as the Superbike murders. So, Amy, can you tell us a little bit more about November 6, 2003?
Yeah, on November 6, 2003, Noel Lee, who is a good friend of the Superbike owner Scott Ponder, pulls up to the motorcycle shop in Chesney, South Carolina around 3 p.m. He encounters a gruesome scene. He first sees Brian Lucas, who is the manager of Superbikes, lying in the door of the bike shop. His body is lying halfway in the shop and halfway outside the front door. As Noel approached Brian, he saw that Brian had blood in his mouth. Noel scans the parking lot and finds the owner, Scott Ponder, on the ground with his head under his mom Beverly's car. Scott was laying on his side. Noel noticed blood running down the asphalt. Not believing what he is seeing is real, he initially wants to believe his friends are pulling a prank on him. Not wanting to touch them, he nudges. Noel used the word kick, and he nudges Brian with his foot.
Right, which he's not doing it in a disrespectful manner.
No, but he's just poking. I think that's how I would interpret it.
Yeah, he's in disbelief, right? And he even does say he thought they were playing a prank. So
he did.
He's like, "Hey, get up," right?
Yeah, for sure. This isn't funny. Brian doesn't respond. Noel steps over Brian's body and goes inside the bike shop to call 911. While he's on the phone with the dispatcher, Noel sees Beverly Guy, who is Scott's mom, who is also the shop's bookkeeper, lying on the floor. She too had been shot. Noel tells the 911 operator that it appears she was walking out of the bathroom and was killed on the showroom floor. He lets the dispatcher know that there's supposed to be a fourth person who works at the bike shop there. Noel requested to go look for Chris Sherbert, who's the mechanic. 911 tells Noel to wait outside for the police to arrive and not to go further into the shop. Chris Sherbert is found by police in the back room, also shot and killed.
So I do just want to say right here, as you mentioned, Chris Sherbert, he's shot and killed in the back in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
And his body is next to a black Kawasaki Katana 600.
That's very creepy.
So from here on out, the police, of course, respond to the scene. They sweep it. According to the police, they cannot find any DNA.
No.
They've got no clues, no direction. They do have a lot of shell casings, right?
Mm-hmm.
For every shot that was taken.
2 different types of shell casings.
Yep, 2 different types, which, I think sets up a natural precedence. The police believe there could possibly be 2 shooters, right?
Sure.
With 2 different guns. However, there's no progress with this case, right? And interestingly enough, as Amy and I really got into the nitty-gritty research of this case, there is a ton of documentation from the police department about this case, hundreds of pages. And I'm bringing that up because as many as hundreds and hundreds of pages brings, there's no solution. They just don't know.
And the police even reached out to John Douglas,
my hero,
to get a profile.
Right. And John Douglas is, again, we said the FBI profiler. So they reach out to the gangster, the OG of profiling and say, help us.
Can you help us? And you know what John Douglas told them?
Tell us how he profiles it. Tell us.
He told them to look for a current or former customer who is disgruntled, who has a criminal background.
Right, which he says because, and I found this very interesting. I love listening to John Douglas talk, but he says, this crime was committed there.
Yeah.
Right? It was all of the employees. It wasn't just one.
Yeah.
It was a revenge killing, but with a specific purpose. Which is so interesting. Now, Amy, why don't you tell us what the police do with that profile?
They file it in a drawer, I'm assuming.
Yep.
No, from what Maria Avis was able to discover.
The investigative journalist.
Yeah,
right?
she, with 10 years later, so it's 10 years of this case not being solved, they send a letter out to some of the bike shop's employees that were flagged by of family that had access to the records.
And a customer list.
A customer list, and they just kind of flag. I will say that the sheriff's office did say that they looked back like within 7 weeks of a bike purchase. But as you recall, Todd bought his bike months and months, his original bike, months before.
Right.
And so
Todd Kohlhepp is never considered a suspect.
He never is.
Never even brought up.
He never is.
But according to the profile given by John Douglas, in theory, he would have fit every
He would have
part
fit perfectly John Douglas's profile, and it would have given the police at least opportunity to question Todd.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit, because they attain this customer list, which shows them everyone who's purchased a bike within a certain time frame or whatever it is. Todd's name is actually on that list. So he does receive a letter, and this is all they do. They send out a letter that says, "Hey, friend."
They as in the police.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Would you mind coming and chatting with us a little bit about this? He doesn't respond.
A lot of people didn't. He wasn't the only customer former customer that didn't respond. So
there's no follow-up.
There isn't any follow-up. There's nobody knocking. And we'll just say Todd still lives near... I mean, he's still in South Carolina.
He's with proximity to the shop. And
if he's not in the same county, he's in the county next to it.
Yeah, I believe it is. It is in the same county or very close by. Either way, he's within range, right? Because this is the shop he picked. He would have gone anywhere that was closest, most likely. But he is never once even brought to the table for this crime.
No.
So, I mean, at that point, the case goes cold.
It does, for 13 years.
And these 4 really wonderful, beautiful humans have lost their lives. Now, we do get, if you get into the research a little bit, you do get to see a little bit about their lives, their families. And it seems like, all things considered, they were very good, loving, and loved people. So it's truly a tragedy to lose them, their family members, and everyone affected. So that was a tough one. Right? It was a tough one for the community. People were in shock. And for it to go cold is also pretty chilling, right?
Yeah.
So, Amy, let's talk about what Todd does, in the meantime. What's he doing between prison, deciding to ride a motorcycle? What's he going to tackle next?
Well, in 2003, actually the same year, Todd began studying at Greenville Technical College. And he's there for not quite a year, and he transfers up to the University of South Carolina upstate. And then within just a few short years, on June 20th, actually, 2006, Todd gets his real estate license, which I will just say has infuriated Sarah and I so much because of Todd's past history. And how can this happen? How can he be serving the public in this way with the criminal background that he has been convicted of?
Yeah. And it's well known in this time period that type of job provides a lot of opportunity or exposure on either side of it to one-to-one altercations, meetings, right? In homes,
that aren't occupied.
Right. And so it's a high risk, if you will. It's a high risk career or, career if you're the one that's licensed, or it can be a risk to the public for someone.
I mean, we went through all of this with Lindsay. So if you've missed that episode, go back and listen to us talk about the pitfalls of being alone in
real estate, which is actually the foundation of this whole podcast. Truthfully, moving forward, that's the subject of a lot of the cases that we're going to discuss. So this is the burning question that, again, I see on all of these platforms and forums is, how did this happen? How did he get a license? What on earth? So let's start, Amy. Let's start with how.
In South Carolina?
Yeah, let's start with the South Carolina licensing requirements and laws and maybe how they've differed since then. So take it away, because you're our South Carolina pro.
Well, I don't know about pro. I mean, I'm not licensed in South Carolina, but
we're going to call ourselves professionals until someone tells us we're not, which is quickly approaching.
In South Carolina in 2006, there was no requirement for a background check to get your real estate license.
Full stop. Here, we've already messed up South Carolina.
I know.
South Carolina, step 1.
There's zero requirement.
Oh my goodness.
Which is crazy. And keep in mind, he is a category 3 sex offender.
Right.
Like that goes nationwide. That doesn't just stay with Arizona.
Correct.
So that in and of itself should make it like he is a danger to public. Like he is the highest risk to reoffend.
Right.
So let's leave him alone with women inside vacant houses.
Yeah, I mean, not that big of a deal, right? Like,
oh my goodness.
And a background check is not required. And so on the application, I saw somewhere on the application, it's like, have you been convicted?
Yeah, they asked this question.
And we know that felons are infamously honest.
Oh, this has just, there are no words to, we are just so upset about this. Okay, no, not shockingly, he lies. He lies on his application. Are you surprised?
Well, let's say this. He takes a dishonest approach to the truth.
Yeah.
So he does check that he has been convicted.
That he served prison time.
Yep, that he's a sex offender, but he's going to tell the licensing board why it's okay.
He writes in his statement that it was a misunderstanding between him and his girlfriend.
Gross.
So, one, she was never his girlfriend.
Definitely gross.
And it was not a misunderstanding.
Even grosser.
He kidnapped her from her house.
And he goes so far as to say, he tells the dog story.
Yeah.
He does. In this letter, he says, we were out looking for a dog and I had a gun because why wouldn't I? And at the end of looking for a dog, we got into some kind of, argument or whatever. And I told her that she had to stand still and talk to me. Amy's just staring at me like, are you serious?
I have never seen this letter, but
he tells
I believe
the story.
You.
He tells the story that he actually takes straight from Christy and spins her story and says, so I was convicted because I happened to have a gun at the same time as I happened to tell my girlfriend that she needed to stay put and finish this conversation with me.
So he doesn't mention the fact that he brutally rapes her.
No, he calls it he says I was convicted of kidnapping, which he was. That was a part of his charges. Yeah. But he's saying the kidnapping is a misunderstanding because he just had the gun on him. He didn't use it. Now, with that bit of information that I did see, it did not go into if he did or did not disclose a sexual relationship with Christy.
He would have had to just say that because
why
would you be a category 3? Maybe South Carolina didn't check.
Well, and honestly, Amy, we both, we actually took a couple weeks to research this case because we really wanted to get the story as correct and clear as we could. And at some point, I did hear a reference to him stating that they had a consensual sexual relationship, although that may have been conjecture. It sounds right because he does have to explain why he was convicted as a sex offender. I don't know for a fact, but I do know that he says it's a misunderstanding because I just had a gun. I told her to stand still.
Well, and Christy was interviewed after the finding of this letter and asked about, years later, right after
present time.
And she's told, and her reaction is, she's disgusted.
She's furious that he misrepresented what happened.
What the situation was.
And that he did it for personal gain.
Well, and he tried to make himself the victim.
He's always the victim. Remember, I said he's the lead actor, actress, supporting roles, producer. Yeah, it's absolutely all about him. But just to put responsibility back on South Carolina. Now, I'm not coming for you, South Carolina, so leave me alone. But
Sarah gets the
somebody decides to checkmark that and approve it.
Yeah, it's approved for his license. Now, I will say by 2015, and this date will be important later in our story, but background checks were required in South Carolina for new applicants.
They installed that at that point.
But not for already licensed agents. And Todd was grandfathered in, meaning that he was exempt from that background.
I'm just wondering who was in charge of that stack of applications that day that was sounds right. Stamped it, moved it on, and then assuming they had their job still in 2015 was oh crap, this sounds important. They're putting this new law in place. Maybe we should do a review of the case.
Yeah.
And they
I
don't.
bet there were some meetings later on
I
about
bet
this.
somebody got in trouble. After Todd is apprehended and exposed as not just a sex offender, but a violent criminal, a rapist, and a
Mass
serial
murder.
killer,
Yeah.
for sure somebody got fired.
Yeah.
We don't know. We can't prove it.
Who knows? All right, Sarah. How are things different here in Utah?
Okay, so this is where we wanted to tie our expertise and our experience as real estate agents into the story today. Because again, this is the burning question that I see that the public has is how did this happen? And it's also interesting because in these like forums and groups where people are discussing true crime, there's always a handful of people that feel the need to answer the question, even if they don't know the answer.
Well, people are just trying to be helpful.
They are trying to be helpful. I'm sure it's innocent, but there's some misinformation and some mistruths out there. So we just want to be clear. We wanted to clarify how Todd received his license and that it wasn't just overlooked. It was actually approved, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to now go over how you get licensed in Utah, the requirements, and who cannot be licensed in Utah. And I do just want to say, not because I just live here and am licensed here, but I think Utah has done an excellent job at being very thorough in their applicants.
I think Utah has made sure that the safety of the public is taken first.
Yeah, and is taken seriously,
Yeah.
right? So as you're applying for a license here in Utah to practice real estate, whether you are applying to be a real estate agent, a broker, or an appraiser, which we'll explain the differences between those roles after this part. Either way, you have to pass a line of qualifications. The first is going to be schooling, right? You have to do a certain amount of schooling. Then you go take a state test, an exam. And if you pass that exam, you can apply for your license.
Yeah.
You have to pass the test first.
Yeah.
So you're going to apply for a license, right? And there's all these different kind of requirements, of course. Like you have to fill out this paperwork. You have to submit, you have to pay a fee. You have to take care of this here and that there. And as a part of the requirements for your application, you have to agree to a criminal background check.
Yes.
You have to agree to submit your fingerprints, not just at the time of your application, but every time you have to renew your license also.
Well, and the background check is also, and in Utah, you have to renew every 2 years.
Correct.
So every 2 years, agents are having to go through a background check and being re-fingerprinted.
Right.
Not their fingerprints are on file and they're just going to go through them. Like, no, they go through the whole system again.
Right. And they do keep them. So I just want to say they do keep record of all of this, and they keep it. I don't have the terminology pulled up right here. I had it pulled up in a previous kind of directive that I read through, but it was pretty dry and hard to understand. But they do keep it in some type of a system called Wrapback. And the reason why they keep all of this on file is because if you are a licensed practicing agent, broker, or appraiser, and you commit a crime when you're already licensed, when you go to renew, you have to do all of that over again, so you don't get by if you've committed a crime.
There's no grandfathering.
No grandfathering. And also, we're going to stay on top of you every 2 years.
Also, it's not like an agent can go out and do a crime and then not have to report themselves for 2 years.
Well, they're supposed to report.
Yeah.
Let's assume that everyone does.
I'm just saying, Utah kind of has this newsletter of shame.
The shame letter.
Yeah.
Newsletter.
Every quarter, any complaints or findings that they have found.
Violations.
Yes. From mortgage people, realtors, appraisers,
anyone in this type.
Yeah, anybody
proximity,
in this, like your name gets blasted to the public. Like it's kind of, and everybody just, the newsletter is pretty long. It's like, 20, 30 pages. Everybody flips to the back to see the list of 5 pages of names on why they were brought before the board.
And to be fair, some of them are very either minor accusations or offenses. Honestly, when we're transacting in real estate, we're making very big transactions happen.
Yeah.
For most people, it's the biggest transaction and decision that they'll make in their lifetime.
Most people, starting housing prices, unfortunately, in Utah are $500,000.
Yeah, the median household price for a
single
size
family.
of home, that would accommodate your typical family. And when I say typical, I mean average. So these are all statistics that they compile for us, right? So excellent point. And we're helping people make these big transactions happen. But small errors can happen and big errors can happen if you're not very
Yeah.
careful. So I will just throw this in there as a part of the real estate sort of general advice that we give. When you select an agent to work with, make sure that you trust that agent. I actually tell clients that I'm working with, new clients typically the most, but even sometimes that maybe have known me before, interview your agent.
Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable or you don't love something maybe that you discuss with that agent, or you just don't get the right vibe, find another agent. There's a dime a dozen, to be honest with you.
You know what I tell my clients? I give my clients, my brokers, information. If you ever have any problem with me, go talk to my broker. Here's his number, you know?
And I love that. I know, Amy, we work together, and I can confidently say that we pride ourselves on transparency.
Yeah.
And on honesty. And when you don't have something to hide, you don't need to hide, right?
Here's all the information. If you want a lawyer, get a lawyer. If you,
Right.
you know, want to work with an agent solely, I know some states, they do require lawyers and agents and whatever. Utah's not one of those, and we'll get into that maybe in another case. But
Yeah, let's see.
regardless, like just be aware you have options.
You do have options. So going back to the process of licensing, not only do you have to, agree to a background check, you submit your fingerprints, but Amy, I'm actually going to read to you right here. This is straight from the Division of Real Estate's qualifications. So I am going to read, and you got to just hang on here with me for a second. I think this is really important because we are trying to highlight the fact that Utah takes every step possible to ensure that its agents, brokers, and appraisers are...
And this information is open to the public. Like,
It
you
is.
can research your state and find this. I mean, in the United States, at least it's available to the public.
Right.
So I can't really speak worldwide, but,
Right.
You can find out what the qualifications are or what background checks are performed on your local market.
Yeah, it's very true. So I'm going to go through all of these. I do just want to say I did, as a part of my research, actually call the Division of Real Estate as well. I know that this information is available online, but I wanted to hear it straight from somebody's mouth, right? So I called over there and I asked to speak to a licensing specialist. And I asked a lot of very suspicious questions. I'm not going to lie. I got a couple.
Did you give him a false name?
No, that's what I'm getting at. So I got a couple questions into it and I was like,
Change my name.
Remember when we picked up the phone and I said, like, hey, my name is Sarah. I'm actually going to change my answer.
My
Hey,
name's
my
Jennifer.
name's Becky. Yeah. Because I was asking questions like, hey, if you commit a crime, can you apply for, and I was more specific than that. But I even asked, I went so far as to ask if a person lives in a different state and is licensed, and then they move to Utah and either want to transfer their license or reapply for a license, if they've committed a crime in those other states.
Oh, good question.
Is that sussed out? And she said, which was kind of a duh moment for me, but she's like, well, a background check is federal, right? It's going to follow you everywhere. Which,
I think they send it to the FBI, don't they? Like, is that what they do?
if it's not what they do, let's just assume that they do, and we're going to run with that. And if we're wrong,
it's okay.
I don't know, email our customer service. But they do keep this information. Yeah, it's on a federal level. So it follows you. So, and at that point, I was like, hang on, look, I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm asking for a friend. I was like,
you didn't even say for research.
No, I was like, for a friend. I realized that I was asking some specific questions.
Yeah, you're totally flagged.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is written down on that woman's desk somewhere for sure. So I'm just going to read over this list, right?
Okay.
Qualification for licensure. Pursuant to the subsection, it names this specific section.
The legalese.
An applicant for licensure, that's hard.
Yeah.
As a sales agent, associate broker, or principal broker, shall evidence honesty, integrity, truthfulness, and reputation. So what that's saying is, in kind of an odd way, is...
You're not going to lie on your application?
Yep, you're not going to lie. You're going to be honest, truthful, and you're going to be upfront with us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which Todd was not.
Again, he took a dishonest approach to the truth, right?
Spun it
and
to fit.
I would think, given the fact that he actually was awarded a license, that they probably didn't have this very long list that I'm going to read to you right now as a part of their qualifications. That's an assumption. However, no way, looking at this list and with all the questions that I asked that poor woman at the division, would Todd have gotten past that in the state of Utah as it stands today.
Okay, as it stands today.
Okay. An applicant may be denied a license or issued a restricted license for incidences in the applicant's past that reflect negatively on the applicant's honesty, integrity, truthfulness, and reputation. In evaluating an applicant for these qualities, the division and commission may consider: 1, criminal convictions with particular consideration giving to any act involving a felony conviction occurring within 5 years preceding the date of the application, and B, a prison or jail term resulting from a felony conviction with a release date falling within the 5 years preceding the date of the application. So it goes, I'm going to keep going here, but I'm just going to pause for a second to say you have a 5-year window. Like if you've committed any felony, not just specific to the list I'm going to carry on here, but any felony or jail term,
so
they
Sarah,
can deny or give a restricted license. Yes, Amy.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So Todd got his license in 2006. He was released from prison in 2001. That's 5 years.
That's true.
Would he be able to get his license in Utah?
No, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay, perfect.
We're going to keep going on
Because
this
I
list
was
right here.
honestly a little scared.
So they approach it in kind of an interesting way. It's kind of like they almost start at the end of the list as opposed to the top of the list, and I'll explain what that means. But what it's saying is any felony conviction within 5 years. So we know there are different classes of felony, but there's also many different kinds of offenses, and not all offenses or offenders are created equal. So, there are different types of violent crime and different types of nonviolent crime, money laundering, right? We often hear like the term white collar crime. There's a big difference. There's a wide scale. And so this is saying any felony. That covers the whole.
That covers all of it.
Yep. Any felony whatsoever. So continuing on, also a conviction of a class A or B misdemeanor or a similar offense involving fraud, misrepresentation, theft, or dishonesty occurring within 3 years preceding the date of the application. So a misdemeanor is what we would consider to be like a lower offense than a felony, right? So they're even taking it so far into class A and B misdemeanor. Mm-hmm. A class C misdemeanor is what most people would consider like a very like a minimal offense, right?
Like for example,
that's a super good question. I mean, I have seen, like in my personal life, in conversation and in just experiencing life as you move forward with people who have gone through the system, if you will, or perhaps who've been subject to the criminal justice system at all within the state of Utah. A C offense is you may or may not get jail time for it, but it's not going to be like a life sentence kind of offense,
like maybe
right?
Up to 90 days.
Yep. So you're saying like public intoxication. So something else that would be kind of in keeping with that would be like disturbing the peace. Possibly like some forms of like fighting in public, or, assault that was maybe not, that didn't result in like permanent injury. So there's all these different qualifications, but what I'm pointing out here is that the board in Utah takes it so far as to say A and B. Mm-hmm. It's not just felony charges, it's class A and B. Okay, so continuing on, also a jail term resulting from a conviction of a class B or A misdemeanor or similar offense involving fraud, misrepresentation, theft, or dishonesty with a release date falling within 3 years preceding the date of the application. So even if you weren't sentenced to jail time, you're still falling under this category of may not be licensed, of you may be denied. Does that make sense? So you can be convicted of an A or a B misdemeanor and not serve jail time, but you can also be convicted of a B or an A misdemeanor and have served jail time. So they're covering their bases.
So in your conversation with the board or someone with licensing, did she tell you how many people are making decisions?
That's a really good question.
Is it a panel?
That's a good question. I didn't ask, but I will note in here that it does say in review of these applications, as the general group, right, that reviews these applications, there is the board and the commission. So
so there's a few people
definitely
that are stamping approval or denial on
those are two different like functioning groups, right? So they both have come together and said this is the qualification for licensing, and if any of these flags are on an applicant's application for licensing, they can review, deny, or issue a restricted license. Now, I'm not familiar with what a restricted license would be.
Sure.
I have not come across
I don't know anybody who has a restrictive license.
Yes, I don't know.
Truthfully.
And maybe, again, we can look into that for
we
future.
I don't know that we ask agents.
We don't,
hey, so do you have a restrictive license or do you have a full license?
That's a really good point. I would think if it is restricted, then there's tasks that they cannot perform.
Yeah.
And so it would be pretty obvious. And those things would probably be like handling of financial information in any way, personal information, and could even potentially be like one-on-one interactions.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a really good question. And I'm happy to like do a little bit more of a dive into this and maybe we can apply it again in a future case, because honestly, like criminal background comes up a lot in real estate. So we could definitely readdress. It's a super good question. Continuing on this list. So any jail term, right, within 3 years related to an A or B misdemeanor. Then also, here we go into kind of the more specific stuff.
Okay, so, perfect. Because so far, Todd
So far, it's real boring.
No. I mean, hopefully our listeners are still with us, but know that Todd so far, I mean, it's up to the discretion of the committee and the subcommittee or whatever, but Todd so far has reached the
minimum requirement.
Well, yeah, like his jail time, prison time, however you want to word that, has exceeded the wait period, is what I'm saying. So
right.
Continue.
Okay, here we go.
Pins and needles, making sure that Todd could, I mean, obviously he can't because he's in prison, but.
You'd be surprised at what he can pull off in prison, though. I'll tell you that. Okay. Anything going on, let's see here, within 3 years preceding the date of application, including plea agreements. Okay, so if you plead. Yep. Past acts related to honesty or truthfulness with particular consideration given to any such acts involving the business of real estate. Right. So if you've made any violation, that's significant. Civil judgments in lawsuits brought against you on grounds of fraud, misrepresentation, or deceit. So if you've been sued civilly by someone who felt like you did them wrong, this has to be disclosed.
Which is a big thing because, we all know that O.J. Simpson wasn't criminally charged, but civilly
you see that a lot.
Guilty.
Yeah. And the victims of Todd Kohlhepp actually sue civilly after he's imprisoned. So it does happen. Continuing on, court findings of fraudulent or deceitful activity. So any court finding doesn't mean you have to be convicted of them. If there's court documentation saying that you participated in something, evidence of noncompliance with court orders or conditions. Evidence of noncompliance with terms of an agreement not yet closed or dismissed. So you have an active case. Probation agreement or a plea in abeyance. And then an applicant who, as of the date of application, is serving probation or parole for a crime that contains an element of violence or physical coercion.
So
I'll
Todd's
get into it.
Category 3 sexual assault would fall into that category.
Here we go. If any of that shows up on an application, they would have to provide for the commission's review current documentation from 2 licensed therapists approved by the division stating that the applicant does not pose an ongoing threat to the public. So anything that's in this next category that I'm going to read here that happened outside of the 5 year, that's a felony, and inside the 5 and then 3 year categories. So this is now it's going to specify for us. It's going to tell us for the purposes of applying this rule, crimes that contain an element of physical coercion or violence include the following. So if you have any of these in your criminal history, You're out. Or if there's an extenuating circumstance,
you have to get signed off by 2 therapists.
Yep, you have to get signed off by 2 therapists.
By their choosing. You can't have Uncle Max pretend he's a therapist.
Exactly. So all of these following categorizations of violence and coercion fall under this rule. Assault, including domestic violence, rape, sex abuse of a child, sodomy on a child, battery, interruption of a communication device, vandalism, robbery, criminal trespassing, breaking and entering, kidnapping, sexual solicitation or enticement, manslaughter, and homicide. Information and documents submitted in compliance with this subsection shall be reviewed by the commission, which may exercise discretion in determining if the applicant can actually qualify for licensure. In evaluating an applicant for competency, the division and commission may consider evidence including civil judgments, failure to satisfy civil judgments, suspension or revocation of professional licenses, and on and on. Okay. So Todd's crimes clearly fall under several of those categories,
there
probably
was
more
like
than half.
7
Mm-hmm.
that you named off.
Absolutely. His probably the only charge, honestly, within this list right here that didn't apply to him at the time
Yeah.
was homicide and manslaughter yet.
Well,
Everything
homicide,
else.
he had murdered the superbikes. He just hadn't been convicted.
Right. Spoiler alert, he did it. But I mean, at the time of his conviction at 15 years old.
Yeah.
Saying all of these things on this list fall into that.
Yeah.
The exception of those final 2. He had not yet been convicted of
No,
manslaughter or
yeah.
homicide. So that alone, and if that list that I just read you gives you any indication of the level of violence that Amy and I don't want to outright discuss, that tells you how violent he was.
Yeah.
So all of those things, starting with a criminal background check, the very specific definitions of what offenses can or cannot, and within what time range they can or cannot apply, right? And then submitting fingerprints every 2 years upon renewal of your license, as well as your continuing education hours. It's what required by the state of Utah, the division, and the board in order to carry your license, continue it, or to apply for it in the first place.
Yeah.
And again, we wanted to bring all of this up.
No, I think it's good information for the public to know, because this is what everybody online forums have wanted to know. How did this happen?
They want to know how, and
why.
They're also asking, like, how do I know who I'm interacting with?
Yeah. How do I know I'm safe when I hire a real estate professional?
Like, why aren't there checks and balances in place?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
And we're answering that for you now. There is, in the state of Utah where we are, and in South Carolina, they had some rules, but either they were a little bit looser or the wrong person was working that day.
Yeah.
Right? So we did just mention briefly that we would actually define very quickly, like what the difference between a real estate agent, a broker, and an appraiser is, just for the sake of making sure our audience understands the jargon that we use in real estate. So do you want to just really quickly give us a brief overview of what the difference between a real estate agent and a broker would be?
Yeah.
And then, an appraiser stands separately, but
yeah.
But just so our audience knows, they still have to qualify under these rules.
Yeah.
Whether they perform a different job function than we do, they still have to qualify.
Sure.
So just tell us real quickly.
So when you get your license, you are a real estate agent. Now, the word realtor is used if you pay a membership to, say, like NAR has the
brand name.
Yeah.
It's a brand.
It is a brand.
And the NAR is the National Association of Realtors. So you don't have to be a realtor in order to be a real estate agent. Now, most of us are.
Yeah.
And at least within Utah, I can't speak for other states, but a lot of boards require you to be a part if you want to be a part of their board.
I think they're trying to step away from that this year, but
yeah, that could be shifting.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying not all real estate agents are realtors. But all realtors are real estate agents.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you have, within Utah, they take 5 years of your transactions, and that's how many houses you've either represented clients to buy or sell. And you get points. I mean, this is complicated, so I'm not going to explain down the deep dive this episode. But you basically have to do 24 transactions within
5 years.
5 years to become a broker, because they want you to be experienced. A broker is kind of the guru and kind of knows the ins and outs. They're supposed to keep agents from going to jail.
A broker is like the daddy of your office.
Yeah, or the mom. Yeah, they're women.
It's 2024. I didn't mean it to be gender related. That's a good point. Thanks for stopping me there.
Yeah.
By daddy, I mean they're the one responsible for agents that are transacting under their brokerage, which also you could also like look at that maybe as like brands, right? So
okay, so if Sarah is called in front of the board for her questions and they're trying to do another background check on her in between her renewal, our broker would have to go with Sarah to the board to kind of, be her like advocate, maybe.
Right.
Is kind of a good word to use.
Yeah. So your broker has to have a minimum requirement of education, like you were saying, experience and education. They actually have to do more schooling.
They have to do a test. They have to,
Yeah. And then as a broker, you can actually hire agents to work as your sales representative is the actual proper term for it. So a real estate agent has to be represented by a broker. They have to be. And the real estate agent is actually a sales rep for the broker, if you will.
Yeah.
And so you're representing your broker when you're helping your client transact, which is why brokers are ultimately responsible, at the end of the day. And by responsible, I mean they are supposed to be involved. They're supposed to be paying attention.
Well,
They're
and a
supposed
lot
to
of
be
the
helping.
brokers that we have been under, which, isn't a ton of brokers because we've kind of stayed.
Yeah, we love where we're at.
But they don't transact a lot because they are busy
Guiding, teaching.
Educating
Yeah.
the agents. They do a handful, but usually not to the level that the agents are doing.
Yeah, so they're managing the sales force, if you will.
Sure.
Let's say it like that. And then just separately, an appraiser is, someone who's hired independently to come in and justify the sales price or the loan value that's being assigned to the home.
Yeah.
Right? And so there are appraisers walking through the home that's being sold and checking very closely the qualifications for this home. So they're in people's homes, which is why they have to also follow these qualifications, right?
Yeah, why they have the background check.
So there's the quick and dirty kind of explanation.
Yeah.
So... And why we wanted to mention that is because Todd was a real estate agent.
He was a broker.
But he was also a broker. That's right. So he opened up his own office, which he named so cleverly TKA, which is Todd, Kohlhepp and Associate.
Yeah, LLC.
Gross. And he hired anywhere from 10 to 12 agents at a time worked underneath him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll just briefly mention before we wrap up part 2, Todd did not have a good reputation amongst his peers.
I think initially when he first started out and he made a lot of money, I think he thought oh, I can do this. Because obviously he had to have done several transactions to become a broker.
He references himself as very successful.
Yeah.
And
but
you're
I'm
right.
Just saying, just becoming a broker,
Sure. I mean, he jumped into this business. Actually, Reggie, his mother, does state later on in life, she was the one that encouraged him to get into real estate.
Oh, my goodness, Reggie.
Reggie hits us again. However, I just want to put it out there. I mean, I think anyone going and opening their own brokerage, right? They're new. I don't know that he was newly licensed. I shouldn't say that. But
yeah,
he's going to put his best foot forward at first.
Initially, sure.
Yeah.
Well, he's a chameleon. He
is a chameleon.
He can seem like the model prisoner. He can seem like I'm in school. I'm doing this stuff. I'll get my real estate license. He is a chameleon in his community.
Which sociopaths and psychopaths are well known for being, right? They were a part of their community, their families. I often hear in the podcasts that I listen to or the shows that I watch, he was a pillar of his community.
Yeah.
So guys, watch out for your pillars.
Yeah.
They're all psychopaths. No, I'm just kidding. They're not. But he put his best foot forward, I'm sure. And he got 10 to 12 agents to work underneath him.
I mean, he was successful enough that people wanted to have his company name on their business cards.
Right. And I'm sure at first he had a good reputation with his clientele as well. However, we do see a decline of this. And his employees, actually, several of them have come forward after his arrest.
Yeah.
And want to state how awful it was to work with him and for him.
Toxic work environment.
Very toxic. I did find some notation in some of these statements that they made in court documents that Todd would make jokes about buying tasers and bringing them to work in order to keep his staff in line. He would deprive them of lunch breaks or of food in order to keep them in line. And again, when I say this stuff, it's all Todd saying he's going to do these things, not actually doing them. But I do want to note that more than one source came forward and said that Todd would often go back to his office and watch pornography in the middle of the day around his peers, which is disgusting and gross because
it's so unprofessional, highly inappropriate.
It's very unprofessional, but it shows an absolute disregard for those around you. So it started to come apart. His empire was starting to fall, right?
Yeah.
And there have actually been other agents and clients that came forward and complained about him before he was apprehended.
Not even... There wasn't complaints just to the board, his board. There was complaints to local police personnel.
Yeah,
in multiple towns where he was doing business.
Right, people
were reporting him.
Felt threatened in his presence. One of the clients that reports him says specifically he talked a lot about guns and how he was a great marksman and he loved guns.
Well, and it wasn't even a client. That lady, she was represented by a different agent, and he was representing
a different party
in the transaction. And she went home and looked him up because it freaked her out. And she saw that he was a category 3 sex offender and he wasn't allowed to own weapons. And so she called the police department, and the police department told her, well, unless you've seen the guns, there's nothing we can do because he's just talking about them. Exactly. And she says, you need to pay attention to him because he is going to do something.
Yeah, the interview that I saw with her, it was pretty brief, but very telling, and it's not inherently bad. It's not bad to be a responsible gun owner. It's not. And we're not here to discuss the subject of gun rights.
Owning guns.
But as a responsible gun owner, which is a constitutional right still, that's not what we're discussing. We're saying
that he can't have them because of
his offenses. Yes, but also there's a time and a place in which to discuss those hobbies or your collection that's appropriate. At a real estate transaction, at a showing, at a meeting, at a closing table, that's not the place.
No, and to do it in way, I'm going to get what I want, and this is how you're going to do. I mean, you had mentioned in case 1 that you love the negotiating part. Could you imagine going to the negotiating and having the other party say, you're going to give me what I want, or I'm going to show you my guns?
That would be such a bad move on that person's part.
I'm just saying.
It's so threatening, though.
No, it totally is. It totally is the most inappropriate, unprofessional
way to discuss your personal life. Yeah. It's definitely not okay. So like you said, this woman did go actually research him and found that he was a level 3 sex offender, which means the information was out there.
Yeah, it's public.
Anyone at any time could have looked him up. Yeah. And I'm going to bring that up a little bit later. I'm going to mention that again. But Amy, we've talked about his sudden hobby of motorcycles. We've talked a little bit about the Superbike motor shop murders, which were very tragic. We've talked about licensing procedures.
Yeah.
And I think we've packed enough information into part 2 that we should take a quick sponsor break. Also, did you get a sponsor for us?
I haven't yet, but I'm working on it.
All right. Back to work, everybody. Okay. We'll talk to you soon.